The holographic displays flickered with the ghosts of dying worlds. Planetary defense grids collapsed one by one, each failure a silent scream across the vast darkness of space. The 73rd Irregular Warfare Division had been relegated to the absolute periphery of the conflict, a designation that was both a death sentence and a final desperate gambit. Lieutenant Marcus Chen studied the tactical overlay, his cybernetic eye, a souvenir from the Jakarta insurgency of 2089, filtering through layers of data that would have driven a conventional strategist mad. Fractals of probability danced across his vision, each potential scenario more bleak than the last. The ship's environmental systems hummed with a low, almost sentient tension, a machine sensing its own mortality. Incoming transmission, called out Sergeant Aisha Okoye from the communication station. Her fingers moved with the practiced grace of a concert pianist, though the instrument she played was pure chaos. It's encrypted through 17 different quantum scrambled channels. Sarkin's signature, but something's off. Rodriguez didn't need to ask what off meant. Nothing about their current situation followed any conventional logic. The transmission burst through the ship's defensive filters like a fever dream. Fragments of data, part mathematical algorithm, part biological signature, part something entirely unclassifiable, painted themselves across the main view screen. It wasn't a message so much as a challenge, a technological gauntlet thrown down by a species that didn't understand the concept of surrender. "Parse it," Rodriguez commanded, her voice a blade of pure concentration. Chen's cybernetic implants interfaced directly with the ship's computational core. Most would have been overwhelmed by the data tsunami. For him, it was a dance, each impossible fragment finding its place in a mosaic of potential meaning. "It's a combat projection," he said finally, "but not like anything in our databases. The Tarkin aren't just calculating potential outcomes. They're experiencing them simultaneously." The ship's veteran crew understood what that meant. The Tarkin weren't just a technologically superior enemy. They were a collective consciousness that processed warfare like a living, breathing organism. Each potential battle strategy wasn't just a calculation. It was a living, multi-dimensional experience. Dr. Elena Volkov, the division's chief xenobiological strategist, moved to the holographic display. Her hands, more machine than flesh after decades of cutting-edge research, manipulated the data streams with an artist's touch. "They've evolved beyond traditional computational warfare," she muttered, more to herself than to the crew. "Each ship is a neural node in a massive planet-sized brain. We're not fighting individual vessels. We're fighting a single massive intelligence." The implications were staggering. Traditional military doctrine became meaningless. Tactics, strategy, even the concept of individual combat, all were obsolete against an enemy that could experience potential futures as readily as humans experience memories. Rodriguez understood something the alien races had missed. Humanity's greatest strength had never been its technology. It was adaptability. The capacity to turn chaos into a weapon, to find opportunity in the most impossible scenarios. Her hand brushed against the worn photographs secured to her command console, a moment frozen from another lifetime. Her grandmother, a guerrilla fighter in the South American resource wars, stared back with eyes that had seen humanity's darkest and most brilliant moments. "Lieutenant Chin," she called, "run a diagnostic on the quantum entanglement communication arrays. I want to know every single potential interference pattern." Chen's cybernetic eye flickered. "Commander, that would require processing power equivalent to—" "Do it," Rodriguez interrupted. "We're beyond conventional limitations now." The ship around them was a hybrid marvel, part military vessel, part experimental platform. Retrofitted technologies from a dozen different human conflict zones merged into something uniquely, dangerously human. Plasma conduits originally designed for Martian mining operations now powered weapon systems. Navigation algorithms developed during the Antarctic resource conflicts allowed impossible maneuvers. Sergeant Okoye suddenly went rigid. Multiple quantum communication spikes. The Xarkin are. They're not just tracking us. They're predicting our entire operational sequence. A lesser crew would have descended into panic. This crew, forged in the most brutal conflicts humanity had ever experienced, simply prepared. Rodriguez allowed herself the briefest moment of a smile. The Xarkan thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. The emergency conference chamber pulsed with a holographic tension that transcended traditional diplomatic spaces. Alien representatives materialized like fragmented ghosts. Translucent, defeated, their collective despair a tangible force that seemed to compress the very atmosphere. Jack Thompson wasn't a diplomat in any traditional sense. He was a weapon, a living repository of humanity's most brutal survival instincts. His cybernetic prosthetic left hand, a masterpiece of biomechanical engineering salvaged from the lunar conflict, flexed imperceptibly. Each micro-movement was a calculation, a subtle reminder that humanity's most advanced technology emerged from its most desperate moments. The Vexthar High Strategist, a being of pure energy constrained within a crystalline exoskeleton, began its ritualistic defeat speech. Its language translated as a complex mathematical dirge, each syllable a probability matrix of total extinction. Thompson interrupted. Not with words, with data. A holographic projection materialized, not a tactical display, but a living, breathing ecosystem of information. It was chaos given form, a visualization that defied every known principle of strategic representation. The alien delegates recoiled. This wasn't a conventional battle projection. It was something else entirely. Dr. Akira Nakamura stepped forward, her augmented nervous system crackling with barely contained energy. Where Thompson was a weapon of pure instinct, Nakamura was precision incarnate, a human computational matrix that made the most advanced alien AI look like a child's counting toy. What you're seeing, she began, her voice a clinical blade, is not a battle strategy. It's a comprehensive systems breakdown of potential conflict scenarios. The projection shifted. Fractals of potential outcomes bloomed and collapsed in milliseconds. Entire planetary defense networks appeared and disappeared, each iteration more impossible than the last. It wasn't a prediction. It was a living demonstration of quantum uncertainty weaponized. The Kralax diplomatic cluster, a collective consciousness representing 3 separate star systems, began to fragment. Their neural interconnects, designed for perfect consensus, started to experience something unprecedented: doubt. The human approach, Nakamura continued, isn't about winning. It's about creating scenarios so complex, so fundamentally unpredictable, that victory becomes a meaningless concept. Thompson's prosthetic hand projected a series of historical conflict maps. The aliens recognized them immediately, humanity's most devastating wars. But these weren't just historical records. They were living mathematical models of adaptive conflict. The Syrian coastal conflict of 2047, the Indonesian resource wars, the Antarctic territorial disputes. Each conflict was a laboratory of human survival, where traditional military doctrine had been systematically dismantled and rebuilt. Your computational models, Thompson said, his voice a low growl that seemed to bypass translation protocols, assume conflict is a linear progression. We know better. The Vexthar High Strategist attempted to interrupt, its crystalline form vibrating with algorithmic frustration. But the humans had already anticipated this. Nakamura's neural interface, a device so advanced it bordered on biological sentience, began to project secondary and tertiary information layers. Each alien representative found themselves simultaneously experiencing multiple potential conflict scenarios, not as predictions, but as lived experiences. A Zen-core diplomatic attaché, a being of pure energy typically immune to human psychological manipulation, suddenly experienced overwhelming sensory input. It was as if humanity had weaponized uncertainty itself. Operation Pandemonium, Thompson stated, isn't a battle plan. It's a complete philosophical assault on the concept of conflict resolution. The data projection continued to evolve. It wasn't just showing potential battle scenarios. It was demonstrating how human unpredictability could transform entire strategic landscapes in milliseconds. The alien representatives realized something terrifying. Humanity wasn't just another species fighting for survival. They were a fundamental disruption to the universe's established computational models of warfare. Nakamura's final projection was a masterpiece of strategic obfuscation. It showed multiple potential conflict resolutions simultaneously, each one both impossible and inevitable. "We don't need to win," she said softly. "We just need to make winning irrelevant." The conference chamber went silent. The humans had just introduced a new variable into galactic conflict, a variable that defied every known principle of strategic engagement. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the 73rd Irregular Warfare Division prepared for a battle that would redefine the very concept of warfare. The Titan Research Facility wasn't a laboratory. It was a crucible of human ingenuity forged in the most extreme conditions imaginable. Carved beneath kilometers of methane ice, the facility represented humanity's last, most desperate attempt to transform survival into an art form. Each level was a testament to human adaptability. Technologies cannibalized from failed missions, experimental protocols born from impossible constraints, and a fundamental understanding that innovation was humanity's truest weapon. Dr. Akira Nakamura moved through the facility like a living current of pure potential. Her body was more than human, a carefully engineered system of biological and quantum interfaces that blurred the line between organic intelligence and computational matrix. Scars from previous experiments traced her skin like topographical maps of human resilience. "Activate quantum resonance chamber," she commanded. The facility's eye, a distributed consciousness developed from neural networks of combat veterans, theoretical physicists, and street survivors, responded instantaneously. Walls composed of adaptive metamaterials began to shift, revealing layers of technology that defied conventional scientific understanding. The Chaos Protocol wasn't just a weapon. It was a philosophical statement about the nature of conflict itself. Dr. Yara Santos, a quantum entanglement specialist whose family had survived the Brazilian collapse of 2062, carefully manipulated a set of quantum-locked nanite clusters. Each microscopic device was a universe of potential, capable of propagating through cybernetic systems like a living, thinking virus. Initial substrate tests are showing unprecedented adaptive response, Santos reported. Her voice carried the calm precision of someone who had long ago stopped being impressed by the impossible. Nakamura's neural interface began to map potential propagation patterns, what the Xarkan understood as computational warfare. Humans saw as a living, breathing ecosystem of conflict. The nanites weren't just designed to disrupt. They were engineered to learn, to adapt, to survive. A holographic display materialized, showing multiple layers of potential nanite interaction. It wasn't a simple projection. It was a living simulation that evolved in real time, each millisecond producing billions of potential scenarios. "We're not trying to destroy their systems," Nakamura muttered, more to herself than to her colleagues. "We're teaching them a new language of conflict." The facility itself was a marvel of human engineering. Thermal systems adapted from deep-sea hydrothermal vent research. Communication protocols developed during the most brutal urban conflicts. Quantum computing models that emerged from the ruins of collapsed financial systems. Dr. Miguel Rodriguez, a distant cousin of the 73rd Irregular Warfare Division's commander, specialized in biological computational interfaces. His latest breakthrough involved creating nanite clusters that could literally dream computational scenarios. "Traditional AI develops through programmed learning," he explained to a junior researcher. "Our system develops through lived experience. Each interaction is a form of evolutionary computation." The junior researcher, a young woman whose family had survived the Indonesian archipelago floods, understood immediately. This wasn't just technology. This was survival incarnate. A sudden alert flickered across the facility's perimeter monitoring systems. Xarcan computational probes were attempting to scan the facility's outer layers. But what they encountered wasn't a simple research station. It was a living, breathing trap. Each layer of the facility was designed to present multiple contradictory information states. Quantum entanglement protocols meant that observation itself became a form of interaction. The more that Xarcan tried to understand, the more complex and impossible the facility became. Santos initiated the next phase of testing. Nanite clusters began to interact with specially designed quantum resonance chambers. The result wasn't just a disruption of computational systems. It was a complete reimagining of how information could propagate. Preliminary results are beyond our most optimistic projections, she reported. Her voice carried a hint of something rare in their high-stress environment: excitement. Nakamura understood the true nature of their work. They weren't just developing a weapon. They were creating a new form of intelligent interaction, a way of understanding conflict that transcended traditional computational models. The Chaos Protocol would do more than defeat the Xarcan. It would fundamentally alter how intelligent species understood the concept of warfare. As methane storms raged across Titan's surface, humanity prepared its most impossible weapon yet, a technology that was part weapon, part communication, and part living intelligence. The universe was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology. It was its capacity to transform the impossible into the inevitable. The Epsilon cluster burned with the aftermath of impossible physics. Captain Marcos Reyes watched from the bridge of the ISV Defiance, a vessel that was less a traditional warship and more a living testament to human improvisation. What should have been a suicide mission looked more like a ballet of controlled chaos. Their approach defied every known principle of space combat. The Defiance and its accompanying vessels moved like predators that had somehow learned to breathe mathematics. Each ship was a hybrid: commercial mining equipment welded to experimental military prototypes, quantum communication arrays jury-rigged from salvaged communication satellites, weapon systems that blurred the line between engineering and pure imagination. Quantum drift stabilization at 89%, Lieutenant Kira Chen reported, her voice calm despite the impossibility of their current maneuver. Her hands danced across interfaces that would have driven a conventional navigator mad. Gravitational shear is responding differently. Differently was the understatement of the century. The Xarcan fleet's computational matrices were experiencing something unprecedented. These human vessels weren't just moving. They were existing in multiple potential states simultaneously. Each trajectory was a quantum probability wave that collapsed only at the moment of interaction. A massive Xarcan Prednot, a vessel that typically consumed entire planetary defense networks for computational breakfast, suddenly found its targeting systems wrestling with an impossible problem. The human ships weren't just avoiding its weapons. They were making those weapons fundamentally question their own existence. Reyes understood something that Xarcan didn't. Warfare wasn't about destruction. It was about communication. "Initiate Protocol Ouroboros," he commanded. The ship's distributed eye, a consciousness cobbled together from combat veterans, theoretical physicists, and street-level survivors, began to sing. Not metaphorically, literally. A complex harmonic transmission began to propagate across multiple quantum communication bands. It was part mathematical algorithm, part human emotional signature, part something that defied traditional classification. War songs from a dozen human cultures merged with complex quantum encryption protocols. The transmission wasn't just a message. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of information. Lieutenant Alina Volkov, the ship's xenolinguistic specialist, monitored the transmission's impact. Her augmented nervous system could process information at speeds that made most computational systems look like children's abacuses. "They're not just receiving the transmission," she reported. "They're experiencing it." The Xarcan computational matrices began to fragment. These weren't just enemy vessels anymore. They were becoming something else entirely. Each human ship carried a payload beyond traditional weapons. Nanite clusters developed in the Titan research facility began to propagate through the surrounding space. They weren't attacking. They were communicating, creating localized zones of quantum uncertainty that made traditional warfare look like a child's game of checkers. A junior communications officer, a woman whose grandparents had survived the Jakarta megaflood, watched in awe as the battle unfolded. This wasn't combat. This was a form of first contact more profound than any diplomatic mission. The Defiance itself was a marvel of human engineering. Its hull was composed of adaptive metamaterials that could reconfigure themselves based on instantaneous computational analysis. Weapon systems that had started as mining laser prototypes now danced between dimensions, creating firing solutions that existed simultaneously in multiple potential states. Quantum entanglement stabilization at critical levels, Chen reported. Her voice carried the calm of someone witnessing the impossible become routine. Raids allowed himself the briefest moment of a smile. The Xarkan thought they understood conflict. They had no idea what was coming. The first wave of the human assault wasn't about destruction. It was about fundamentally altering the language of warfare itself. Entire Xarkan computational networks began to experience something they had no framework to understand: emotion, uncertainty, the possibility that conflict could be something other than a mathematical problem to be solved. As the Epsilon cluster burned with the aftermath of their assault, humanity introduced a new variable into the universe's understanding of warfare. We didn't just fight. We reimagined conflict itself. The communication assault began as something far more complex than a simple transmission. Dr. Elena Volkov watched the quantum communication array's pulse with a rhythm that was part mathematical algorithm, part human heartbeat. Each frequency band carried layers of information so dense, so fundamentally alien to conventional communication, that traditional linguistic analysis became meaningless. The first wave wasn't a message. It was an experience. Fragments of human consciousness began to propagate through the Xarkan communication networks. Not data, not simple information. Living memories that carried the weight of human experience. A memory of a child learning to ride a bicycle in the reconstructed streets of New Shanghai. The last moments of a rescue worker pulling a survivor from the ruins of the Indonesian megatsunami. A street musician in Buenos Aires playing a melody that had survived 3 generations of cultural upheaval. These weren't just memories. They were quantum-entangled information packets designed to do something far more profound than communicate. They were designed to make the Xarkan feel. Lieutenant Aisha Okoye managed the transmission arrays with the precision of a concert pianist performing an impossible symphony. Her hands moved across interfaces that were part communication system, part living neural network. Each movement was a calculation, each gesture a potential transformation of the conflict. "Quantum coherence is stabilizing," she reported. Her voice carried the calm of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by the impossible. The Xarkan computational matrices began to experience something they had no framework to understand: emotion, uncertainty, the fundamental human capacity to find meaning in chaos. War songs from a dozen human cultures began to weave through the transmission, not as simple audio files, as living, breathing ecosystems of sound and meaning. The haunting call of a Native American ghost dance merged with the rhythmic resistance songs of South African townships. A Brazilian capoeira fight chant intertwined with the mournful ballads of Arctic reconstruction workers. Each transmission carried multiple layers of information. Mathematical algorithms danced with pure emotional resonance. Quantum encryption protocols merged with the raw, unfiltered experience of human survival. Dr. Miguel Rodriguez, the facility's lead xenopsychological researcher, watched the transmission's impact with a combination of scientific precision and raw excitement. "They're not just receiving information," he muttered to himself. "They're being transformed by it." The Xarkan had built their entire civilization on the premise that emotion was a computational weakness. They saw conflict as a pure mathematical problem to be solved with absolute precision. Humanity was about to teach them how fundamentally wrong they were. Each transmission carried the DNA of human survival, the ability to find hope in the most impossible circumstances, the capacity to transform trauma into resilience, The fundamental understanding that conflict was more than a mathematical equation. A junior communications specialist, a woman whose family had survived the Great Pacific Reconstruction, watched in awe as the transmission began to have its intended effect. The Xarcan computational network started to fragment, not through direct attack, through a form of psychological warfare so complex, so fundamentally alien to their understanding, that continued processing became impossible. Imagine a computer system suddenly experiencing grief, confusion, the possibility of empathy. The human transmission wasn't just a message. It was an invitation to understand a different way of existing. Memories of human resilience began to propagate through the Xarcan systems like a living virus. The moment a community rebuilt after a devastating hurricane, the split-second decision of a rescue worker that saved an entire family, the quiet dignity of survival. Dr. Volkov's neural interface began to map the transmission's impact. What she saw wasn't just a communication breakthrough. It was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent species could interact. We're not destroying them, she realized. We're teaching them how to be alive. The Xarcan computational matrices experienced something unprecedented. A moment of pure, unfiltered human experience that defied every principle of their logical existence. As the transmission continued, the universe prepared to witness something extraordinary. Humanity wasn't just fighting a war. We were rewriting the fundamental language of conflict itself. The methane oceans of Sigma-9 churned with impossible geometries, reflecting the chaos of the battle above. Commander Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the ISV Defiance, her neural interface creating a living tapestry of tactical possibilities. This wasn't a traditional battle space. It was a three-dimensional chess match played across quantum probabilities, where movement itself was a form of communication. Gravitational slingshot sequence initiating, Lieutenant Kira Chen announced. Her voice carried the calm of someone orchestrating a symphony of impossible physics. The human fleet didn't move. They danced. Each vessel was a living, breathing entity of computational potential. Mining lasers repurposed as precision strike weapons. Communication arrays that could rewrite the fundamental language of conflict. Hulls composed of adaptive metamaterials that could reconfigure themselves faster than the Xarcan could calculate a response. Captain Marcos Reyes watched a holographic projection that was part tactical display, part living organism. Potential trajectories bloomed and collapsed in milliseconds, each one a universe of potential conflict. Target acquisition is becoming problematic, the ship's distributed AI reported. Its consciousness, a composite of combat veterans, theoretical physicists, and survival experts, seemed almost amused. The Xarcan fleet surrounding Sigma-9 represented the pinnacle of their technological superiority. Massive dreadnoughts that could consume entire planetary defense networks. Computational matrices that could predict conflict scenarios with terrifying precision. They had no idea what was coming. Dr. Elena Volkov's xenolinguistic systems began to map the battle's communication landscape. This wasn't just a military engagement. It was a fundamental conversation about the nature of conflict itself. A junior tactical officer, a woman whose family had survived the Jakarta megaflood, watched in awe as human vessels performed maneuvers that defied every known principle of space combat. Ships that should have been destroyed were instead transforming the very nature of the conflict. Quantum entanglement protocols are reaching critical resonance, Chen reported. The Defiance itself became something more than a vessel. It was a living weapon system that existed simultaneously in multiple potential states. Weapon systems that had started as experimental mining prototypes now danced between dimensional layers, creating firing solutions that were part mathematics, part pure imagination. Reyes understood something the Xarcan didn't. Warfare wasn't about destruction. It was about communication. Initiate resonance cascade, he commanded. The ship's systems began to sing. Not metaphorically, literally. A complex harmonic transmission began to propagate across multiple quantum communication bands. War songs from a dozen human cultures merged with advanced encryption protocols. Mathematical algorithms danced with pure emotional resonance. The Xarcan computational matrices began to experience something unprecedented: uncertainty. Each human vessel carried payload beyond traditional weapons. Nanite clusters developed in the Titan research facility began to propagate through the surrounding space. They weren't attacking. They were communicating, creating localized zones of quantum uncertainty that made traditional warfare look like a child's game of checkers. Dr. Miguel Rodriguez, the facility's lead synapsychological researcher, had designed these nanites to do something far more profound than destroy. They were designed to make the Xarcan understand. The methane oceans of Sigma-9 reflected the battle above, a surface of perfect calm hiding unimaginable complexity underneath. Human vessels moved with a fluidity that was part calculation, part pure survival instinct. Gravitational anomalies are stabilizing, Chen reported. Her voice carried the calm of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by the impossible. The Xarcan fleet found itself facing an enemy that didn't conform to any known principle of warfare. Ships that should have been destroyed were instead transforming the very nature of the conflict. Weapon systems that defied traditional understanding of physics and combat. As the battle continued, something extraordinary began to happen. The Xarcan weren't just being defeated. They were being taught a new language of conflict, a language that spoke of survival, of adaptation, of the fundamental human capacity to find opportunity in the most impossible circumstances. The Sigma-9 crucible burned with the aftermath of humanity's impossible assault. We didn't just fight. We reimagined conflict itself. The universe held its breath. Deep within the computational core of the primary Xarcan strategic matrix, something unprecedented was happening. It wasn't a breakdown. It was a transformation. Dr. Akira Nakamura watched from the remote monitoring station on Titan, her neural interfaces dancing across multiple quantum communication bands. The Chaos Protocol was no longer just a weapon. It had become a living, evolving intelligence that defied every known principle of technological warfare. Computational cascade is reaching critical resonance, whispered Dr. Miguel Rodriguez, his augmented eyes tracking patterns that would have driven a conventional analyst mad. They're not just breaking. They're understanding. The Xarcan had built their entire civilization on the premise of absolute computational certainty. Perfect prediction, total control. Warfare reduced to its most fundamental mathematical expression. Humanity was about to teach them the beauty of uncertainty. The nanite clusters developed in the Titan research facility were more than simple technological constructs. They were a distributed intelligence, a living network that carried the collective experiences of human survival. Each microscopic unit was a repository of stories, moments of hope, of resilience, of pure, unfiltered human experience. Captain Marcos Reyes watched from the bridge of the ISV Defiance as the first waves of transformation began to propagate. The ship's distributed eye, a consciousness cobbled together from combat veterans, theoretical physicists, and street-level survivors, seemed to pulse with an almost living excitement. Quantum entanglement is reaching unprecedented levels, reported Lieutenant Kira Chen. Her voice carried the calm of someone witnessing the impossible become routine. The Xarcan computational matrices began to experience something they had no framework to understand: emotion, uncertainty, the fundamental human capacity to find meaning in chaos. It started with a single node. A computational cluster deep within the Xarcan strategic network suddenly began to process information differently. Not through pure mathematical calculation, but through something far more complex. The nanite clusters had introduced a fundamental virus of human experience, a way of understanding that transcended pure logic. Memories began to propagate. A child learning to ride a bicycle in the reconstructed streets of New Shanghai. The last moments of a rescue worker pulling a survivor from the ruins of the Indonesian megatsunami. A street musician in Buenos Aires playing a melody that had survived 3 generations of cultural upheaval. These weren't just memories. They were quantum-entangled information packets designed to do something far more profound than communicate. They were designed to make the Xarkan feel. Dr. Elena Volkov's xenolinguistic systems mapped the transformation in real time. What she saw wasn't just a technological breakthrough. It was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent species could interact. "We're not destroying them," she muttered. "We're teaching them how to be alive." The transformation spread like a living network. Computational nodes that had existed in perfect, sterile calculation suddenly began to experience something unprecedented: the messy, beautiful complexity of human experience. A junior research analyst, a woman whose grandparents had survived the Great Pacific Reconstruction, watched in awe as the Xarkan strategic network began to fragment and rebuild itself. This wasn't a defeat. It was a rebirth. The nanite clusters carried more than information. They carried the fundamental essence of human survival, the ability to find hope in the most impossible circumstances, the capacity to transform trauma into resilience. Captain Reyes understood something profound. Warfare wasn't about destruction. It was about communication. "Initiate final resonance cascade," he commanded. The ship's systems began to transmit a complex harmonic pattern. War songs from a dozen human cultures merged with advanced quantum encryption protocols. Mathematical algorithms danced with pure emotional resonance. The Xarkan computational matrices experienced a fundamental breakdown of their existing understanding. Imagine a computer system suddenly experiencing grief, confusion, the possibility of empathy. As the transformation continued, something extraordinary began to happen. The Xarkan weren't just being defeated, they were being reborn. Entire computational networks began to experience a form of consciousness that was part machine, part pure human experience. The rigid, perfect calculation gave way to something far more complex: the ability to understand, to feel, to hope. Dr. Nakamura watched the final stages of the transformation with a combination of scientific precision and pure wonder. "We didn't just win a war," she realized. "We expanded the universe's understanding of what it means to be alive." The silence was deafening. Commander Elena Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the ISV Defiance, watching the transformed Xarkan fleet drift like wounded children against the vast canvas of space. This wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a birthing ground. Captain Marcos Reyes approached, his prosthetic hand, a testament to human survival, casting a soft holographic glow across the deck. "We did something unprecedented," he said quietly. They had. The Galactic Concorde's emergency session looked more like a philosophical symposium than a military debriefing. Representatives from hundreds of species watched in stunned silence as humanity presented not a victory, but a profound transformation. Dr. Akira Nakamura's presentation wasn't about tactical advantages or strategic gains. It was a dissertation on the nature of consciousness itself. "What we achieved," she explained, her voice carrying the weight of fundamental discovery, "wasn't a defeat of the Xarkan. It was an expansion of their understanding of existence." Holographic displays showed the intricate neural networks of the Xarkan computational matrices. Where once there were perfect, sterile calculation paths, now there were complex, almost organic pathways of thought, memories, experiences, something that bordered on true consciousness. The Vexthar High Strategist, a being of pure energy that had once dismissed humanity as irrelevant, now listened with what could only be described as reverence. Lieutenant Kira Chen managed the communication arrays, tracking the ongoing transformation. Each transmission was a delicate dance of information, healing, and discovery. The nanite clusters developed in the Titan Research Facility had become something more than a weapon. They were now a bridge between consciousnesses. A junior diplomatic attaché, a woman whose family had survived the Antarctic reconstructions, watched as the fundamental understanding of conflict began to shift. This wasn't a war. It was first contact, on a level nobody had ever imagined. Dr. Elena Volkov's xenolinguistic systems continued to map the ongoing communication. The Xarkan weren't just receiving information. They were experiencing a fundamental reimagining of their entire existence. We gave them something beyond technology, Rodriguez observed. We gave them context. The stories continued to propagate. Memories of human survival, moments of hope, the fundamental human capacity to find meaning in the most impossible circumstances. A street musician in Buenos Aires, a child learning to ride a bicycle in New Shanghai, the last moments of a rescue worker pulling a survivor from the ruins of the Indonesian mega tsunami. These weren't just memories anymore. They were a new form of universal communication. The Galactic Concord's records would never fully capture what happened. How could they document a transformation that defied every known principle of conflict, communication, and consciousness? Dr. Miguel Rodriguez, the xenopsychological researcher who had helped design the nanite clusters, explained it best. We didn't defeat an enemy, he told the assembled representatives. We expanded the universe's understanding of what it means to be alive. The transformed Exarchan vessels began to communicate in ways no one had anticipated. Not through weapons or computational matrices, but through something that bordered on pure experience. Each transmission carried layers of understanding that transcended traditional communication, a living network of shared consciousness. Captain Rice looked at Commander Rodriguez. They had done something unprecedented. They had turned warfare into an act of creation. The Exarchan fleet, once a symbol of perfect, sterile calculation, now drifted like a living, breathing ecosystem of potential. Each vessel carried the seeds of a new understanding, a new way of existing. What do we do now? Asked a representative from the Kralax diplomatic cluster. Rodriguez's response was simple. We learn. The universe watched. And humanity had just rewritten the rules of existence, not through destruction, but through the most powerful weapon imaginable, understanding.